He kōna ipurangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
Ti he mauri ora ki te whaiau, ki te whaiau, ki te maramaki au. We ti he wa mauri ora ko Māpuna tēnei e mihi au tūnei. Kia ora and welcome back to Māpuna, the podcast. And this week we're talking ethical finance, but ethical finance with a bit of a difference. We're talking with Temuera Hall. He is the co-founder and managing director of Tahito. Now, Tahito is an ethical investment company, but it's an indigenous-based ethical investment company. Maori developed and founded alongside Chris Winitana. It's bringing traditional Maori values into the world of finance. Now, it's mainly focused on Australasia at the moment, but it could go global. Why are companies keen on approaching Tem and Tahito, and what are the values that he brings? Is it the usual things we talk about a lot? Manaakitanga, kaitiakitanga, rangatiratanga, collectively euphemistically called the tangas in many sectors? Or is it something much deeper, much richer, much more meaningful to drive a different outcome other than the usual things we talk about now? Not just capitalist gain, but, quadruple bottom line. These issues and more, including his start as a part of the forestry company in Ngāti Tuwharetoa. He is Ngāti Tuwharetoa and of Te Arawa descent. So our guest is Temuera Hall. I hope you enjoy the kōrero, talking ethical investment, Māori ethical investment, indigenous ethical investment, with Tem and his company Tahito on Māpuna this week. Whakarongo mai. He uri no Ngāti Tuwharetoa me Te Arawa. Temuera Hall joins me now. Te whananga Temuera, tēnā koe.
Ai, tēnā koe, Julian.
Kia ora e hoa. Good to see you again
After
such a long time, and good to be able to talk to you. Before we talk about Tahito, I can remember you were working in the forestry biz a long time ago. You've always been involved in business, and I think had a penchant for business. Where did that start? How did it start?
When we come back, like a lot of young Kiwi and Māori, you travel overseas and you get your eyes opened. You wonder why, firstly, you get despondent around the fact that we have all these issues in New Zealand and we're such a small drop in the ocean. And then you come back to, it's our whakapapa. It's our whakapapa that gives us our place in the world. Anyway, I come home from that and thinking that New Zealand was too small and I might have to go and work with these Māori mates I'd met out of Australia. And I got asked to go and become the deputy manager at the Forest Trust, Lake Taupo Forest Trust, out of Tūrangi. So, you come back from the bright lights of big cities around the world and now you're in Tūrangi at the southern end of our lake. It was a fortunate time in that we were just starting to harvest the trees. So the trust was, just really sitting there quite dormant, and but had all this potential to grow. And once the money started flowing in, then we had to build our capacity. And I come in right at the cusp of that, which meant putting in place, just accounting systems, policies, planning. And I hadn't done this before. I didn't do a business degree, but that was my responsibility, and I managed to make sure I had good people around me to help. So it was very much learning on the job, and part of that role was the finance and treasury function, and that treasury function grew into the investment function. But back then, when we first set up our investment board, and which was a strategic decision by the trustees. Do we outsource all our finance and funds management capacity? Or do we bring it in-house?
Chuck it in like a Milford Assets company or something like that, right?
Yeah, and back then it was the likes of AMP, and do we give it out to them or the banks? And they made a conscious decision through quite a big, strategy process that we went through to keep it in-house. And so I was the person there on the spot.
But it was also an interesting time, generally speaking, for Māori business, right? So at that stage, yes, there had been some settlements, but the Ngaitos and the Waikato Taunuis and those ones of the world weren't as big as they are now. They'd only just started getting to post-settlement governing entities and things like that. Who were you looking at that time? Who was out there? So I know you talked about the likes of people that you had, but in terms of other Māori companies, who was big at the time that you could look at and go, okay, here's a bit of a pathway here? Or were you generally just going, gee, we've got to create this from the ground up?
Yeah, we were still going through the process of winding the crown out of the forest.
Okay.
So there was a gradual handback. We had a couple of wins in the Environment Court, or not the Environment Court, the arbitration over stumpage, which now increased our revenues. And so we got more and more involved, because otherwise, like a lot of our Māori foresters, we were just glorified landlords that happened to have pine trees. But as we grew and had more and more control of the tree stock itself, and now we were funding the replant, well, then you develop with that. So it was very much in that forestry space was a development. But what happened with the likes of, the board I had, and also got a guy in who was like a mentor and advisor. And my first introduction was to the trading banks, the trading arms of the banks, the stockbrokers, the bond brokers, the money market people at wholesale level. And they almost took, here's this little Māori entity in the space, because we were really under the scale that they would really allow people into. We weren't quite wholesale, but they allowed us in, because we were Māori and we were different. So that was where most of the learning come from.
Wow.
Being exposed to the banks, and then the JB Wares back in the day. We had close relationships with AMP. And we actually had to move the business down to Wellington, because back that time the trading banks were in Wellington.
We're all there, yeah.
And we weren't big enough for them to call us. So we moved down to Wellington. And then over time, when we started, Tina and I started having kids, we thought time they went back and saw their maunga instead of just talked about it. And we were big enough then to come back to Taupo, and then online communication had improved. The Forest Trust itself, we had engagements with Tainu in particular, because they were just up the road, but those were in their crazy days where they were still finding themselves.
There were some things going on,
Yeah, so we sort of looked at by this time we'd developed some disciplines around how we invest in risk management and those things, and I was looking at some of their stuff and going, that's a bit out the gate.
Yeah.
But, look where they are now.
Yeah.
You can't knock them for that. That was just putting your toe in the water, really.
How important, though, was that experience? As you said, you and Tina went home. I remember, with the wānanga and things of that nature, you fellas were at home. How important was that time, do you think, being foundational for what you're doing now? Because people talk about Māori values all the time. I hear the tanga rule. It's all the tangas, the rangatira tanga and the kaitiaki tanga and all this kind of stuff. But sometimes you have to have the lived experience, not just of being at home, but working with people at home. Helps ground you. How foundational and important was that in terms of what you're doing now, Tim?
Well, some wider context. Back then, the Forest Trust and the Tūwhareto Trust Board were hand in hand, right? Hepi was chair of both of them, and a lot of the trustees were similar, and they were our rangatira, Not only did they sit in these seats of our tribal entities, they were the main people on their respective marae.
Yeah.
And they'd show up to a meeting in a suit and a tie. That was the standard, and that's what we got raised under. And so they were the leadership. Even Tuaropaki was supported by the Trust Board in its early years, as was the Forest Trust. It was supported by the Trust Board, Lake Taupo and Rotaira. And so we had all of that legacy there. And, we forget about this new millennia and what life was like back then. And, it was 2000, so we come up with this crazy idea of Tūwhareto 3000. And I'll tell you, just a bit of a sideline. The short end of that is when we tried to look 1,000 years ahead, what did we want to have retained? Tongarero te mauna, taupo nui a te moana, ngāti Tūwhareto te iwi. Retaining our pepeha and the connection to our environment. That's what fell out anyway. But off the back of that, as you said, one of the other projects we took up was a wānanga. Again, it was around leadership. How do we instill our values? And we were feeling our way. And that was when I connected with Chris Winitana, he's the other co-founder. He helped me do all the background stuff to Tahito. And then, yourselves and the others, we had Maori Ora Kingi, Sean Allison. We had a illustrious life. We had illustrious people. We don't now we look back and say we didn't appreciate the taonga we had around us. We were young and on a journey and going to all our marae.
Running up Maunganamu.
Reciting karakia morning and night. Yeah. But that helped form the foundation to really what this, because otherwise it's quite difficult to bring ethics and values.
Why? Why, Tim? Why is it difficult?
Jumping into that space, mate, the fundamentals of te ao Māori worldview and te ao Pākehā is collectivism versus individualism.
You mentioned not just, so you're not just talking about like operation, you're talking outcome.
Talking outcome, we're talking legal processes, legal systems, insurance, and how that whole system works, and the focus of it, shareholder primacy versus stakeholder primacy, for example. Just collectivism means you want to lift everyone, not just the profits for those ones that you directly connect to. So then you get into the likes of words you learn, mate, externalities. I had to learn that from accountants, you know. What's an externality? Oh, it's what's not on your balance sheet, right? So that's the environment, you know. Now we're starting to measure these things, but back then they were just a resource. So that fundamental difference is the environment a resource or is it a taonga? And for most of our systems, like you take our New Zealand farming system, and I'm on Opepe, one of our large tūwhareto farm trusts, we can't sell the land, which is a lot of our Māori businesses. Well, if you can't sell the land, you're now contrary to this business structure of which agriculture and dairy in particular is about, because it's all premised on eventually being able to sell your biggest asset, which is the land, and cash it up and move on. Well, if you can't sell the land, we don't fit into that business model. But now we get into where capitalism, cultural capitalism, what is it, you know, and that debate, which is just ongoing, but we've been unpacking those things now for a number of years.
How and why did Tahito start?
My wife got a job. Actually, she went away on these. It was to Stanford.
Oh, yeah.
There was a group of them that were going, and it was pretty much the Māori primary industry.
The boot camp.
Yeah. Stanford boot camps, and they come back, and of course you come back, and you've been, you know, you're elevated, and you want to go and save the world and do bigger things. And her mate Liz Te Amo convinced her to go to New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. And so she applied, started working there. Well, that moved us up to Auckland. And, you know, at that time I'm going, oh, geez, I've been doing this for quite a while with the tribe and starting to feel a bit stale. You know, maybe it needs something fresh, and I need to go and do something different. So I tagged along, as you do, and I thought, oh, yeah, it's closer to the ocean. We've been inland for a while. And so that's what brought us up to Auckland. And I still had some governance roles, and then just did some consultancy work for other Māori entities during that time. But I had a lot of free time, and so I took the kids to school every day, picked them up, you know, most days.
Awesome.
And that was for 2 years of that. And it's important to note, because when I talk to the most successful and wealthiest people I know, and you ask them what is their biggest regret in life, it was not spending time with their kids. So, you know, and so that's advice I give to anyone who cares to listen or ask. Spend time with your kids, because, you know, once you get past all this career and self-gratification stuff, I suppose, it comes back to whānau, doesn't it?
What are you looking at me like that for? Anyway, carry on.
No, you're one of our leaders in this space. We need you to carry on, mate. You need to be selfish and lead us in this space.
Anyway.
But, yeah, you know, it does come back to whānau and those memories you had. And, you know, that bond with your kids. But we do it. That's whanaungatanga. We do it naturally anyway as Māori. If it's not your parents, it's your aunties, it's your uncles, it's your grandparents. We, you know, if you're lucky to live in a community, we've got those structures around us. So, yeah, and so kids playing junior rugby, standing on the sideline, this guy Paul Glass and then Andrew Kelleher, they were involved with this investment services group, and they'd heard what I'd done. And they said, oh, do you want to come and work with us? And I said, well, only if I can do something that has a Māori kaupapa. And they said, well, put up a business case. So I talked with my mates and we put a business case up, and they were brave enough to take it on. At this time, the Māori economy is, you know, what are we talking, 2017 odd?
Oh, yeah.
Right, Māori economy is starting to grow. People are starting to see it as attractive and trying to connect. And so that's how that happened.
And you said you co-founded it with Chris. How important was it having someone like Chris Winitana involved in the evolution of this?
Yeah. Well, he's a tohunga in my mind. You know, his knowledge retention and his ability to then take our whole te ao Māori view, you know, from ngā rangi tūhaha, ngā whakapapa mai runga ki raro, mai rangi ki papa, a ki tua atu o rangi rau ko papa hoki, and beyond rangi and papa. A lot of people don't look at our creation whakapapa. And, so that our relationship grew up out of those wānanga days. And, of course, we went to places like Miringata Kākara, and, that last sort of wānanga.
Yeah.
And that exposed you to all Peita Hurinui's work. And then, as you said, we had Chingi Tutu. So we had all that influence. Well, Chris could retain all that stuff. And I haven't seen, Sean was like that too, probably Maori order. So there was 3 people that had this retentive memory that anything you said to them, they're never going to forget. And then they can turn it out in pao, waiata, whai kōrero, whatever. They could just deliver it and seamless. And you have to remember, they're exceptional. They're not the norm. I don't have that retentive. So having someone like Chris with that knowledge background that can also bridge the thinking into this sort of context. So that first layer of, well, how do we take this and without offending the respective iwi that we might all connect to, so that we don't get told off by going, oh, you're now using our stuff.
Yeah.
How can we create all of that? What's more of our universal whakapapa and kōrero and pūrākau that we can then grab these values from to then start as a platform. So we probably really didn't have an idea to start with, but by default we had all this time, developing our values around through that wānanga process. So it was just a matter of mixing the water with the powder, I suppose.
What are the values that you're talking about that came out of that wānanga process?
Right. Now, I don't get many forums where you can drive into the deep end. And again, I'm not the retentive person. No. But we took the first set of whakapapa is that creation narrative from Peita Hurinu'i. And, you have these bloody mind-blowing moments. We'll be learning all this stuff, and then you walk up into the Auckland Museum and you see it on the wall. Hey? You see it on the wall coming down to rangi and papa, Now, Peita Hurinu'i stuff is a safe place for us. Te arawa, tainui, we accept it. And so that we start with all that, because you have to start to understand that to understand our environment that we're in, there's all the stuff that goes before rangi and papa. And when you don't have to properly, immerse yourself in it, but you just need to know that we have a creation narrative, because that starts to show that our science and our knowledge systems was far greater than our generation, our parents' generation, and probably 3 or 4 other than those in that space. That we had comparable knowledge systems and a scientific knowledge system through observation and experience, which rivaled the Pākehā and the Western models. And you need that, you sort of need that pou tokomanua, through the whakapapa. So we started with all of that. We just document it, and I put it up now. I show people and go, look at all this.
Wow.
And then you internalise it. That's duality. Right, now we're at rangi and papa. And you say to them, this is what just brings us to sky and earth, which without sky and earth, you don't have everything in between, including humans. Right? And then here's the 70 children of rangi and papa. Oh, and then, by the way, here's where our tūwharetoa te arawa, our tainui whakapapa starts, tūmā tauenga and hene ahuane, not tāne and hene titama. But, that's another kōrero. But it's to emphasise we had this knowledge, we had this creation narrative, we had this evolutionary narrative, and here's our connection to everything in the environment, which underpins the values. Everything's interrelated, nothing exists of itself, right? That's an indigenous, it's not just Māori, it's an indigenous kōrero. And so once you got that, then you got something, you got your starting point, really. And this, this is what, Chris, this is what he started. So where did we go after that? Well, let's go to Ngārua Hene. Let's go to our wāhene atua. So we're talking Apakuro, Te Aroha, Hene Ahuone o Te Kura, Hene Titama o Te Tapu, Hene Nui Te Pō o Te Wairua, Mahuiki o Te Maui, all those stuff. And, what are we talking about there? Compassion, nature, sacredness, eternity, passion, purpose, unity. So we were still up in the ether, but this is what starts to form our values. And then we went down the Maui whakapapa, right through all of that kōrero, and exploited, I suppose, maybe wanting a better word, extracted from Maui the sort of traits that you could turn into values. So then we get into Do you mind me just rambling on this
you're
space?
fine. Yeah. By the way, we're talking to Temuera Hall. He is the co-founder of Tahito, a company trying to harmonise investment with Māori values, working with a number of companies founded in 2019.
Yeah. So, sort of jumping a little bit, what we settled on and what we're trying to do is actually we want to measure behaviour change. What's sat before that is we took the literal meaning of the word aroha, kia aroaro te ha, and going, right, to feel someone's breath, you have to be pretty close to them. So that's connection. And, this is Chris's talk again. You increase your aroha, you'll increase the Maori. And they're going, right, that's us. That's what we're starting with. And so we're measuring aroha connection. And it talks to the fact that if we want to sort of reverse climate change, biodiversity loss, we need to reconnect with the environment. Okay, well, that's embedded in our kōrero, in our Māori kōrero. Let's just lift that out and form that as the basis. Reconnecting humans to the environment. Because arguably it's loneliness and disconnection, right? The form of loneliness is unconnected, disconnection from the environment. That is what underpins all the issues that we're facing and trying to address. So you're down to equity, and so it's a human trait you have to actually deal with, not reduce carbon and recover. That's what comes down the track. For that to happen, your leadership has to believe in something and want to do something. So hence we got into we're measuring behaviour change. We're measuring how companies are transforming, not transitioning, but transforming from internally self-absorbed about themselves and their profit, with a very exploitative behaviour, to those that are moving towards our ideology, which is in harmony, in balance, consensuality, and connected with the environment and the communities. And so you're into circular economy, you're into regenerative. Remember, these terms were developing at the same time we were working.
You were doing this.
Yeah. ESG was developing.
Yeah.
How
open are companies to this kind of process and exchange and mahi now, Tim?
Initially, we thought we're just going to get laughed out of the room when we walk in and say we're about
all of this,
measuring behaviour change.
Yeah.
But the learned academics and people that are genuine around it's selflessness. We got these two other values, and I'm sort of throwing them out out of order. But two of the hardest ones, I think, they're hardest because they're hard to measure. One is we call it nākau aroha, selflessness and compassion. So you're not about yourself anymore. You're about everything around you first, before yourself, which again is contrary to a lot of the laws and the way finance operates. It's about individual wealth, personal property rights, personal, insurance and cover for your personal risks, and then your entity risk, which comes back to people as opposed to the interrelated connectiveness. So there's and then the other one is Mauri ohoho, and again, I mean the easy that is Mauri. That's well-being, I suppose, is one of an easy translation, but it's more than just well-being. Right, because there's this big wairua content, and we try not to get caught up in wairua because it gets lost in religion. But that's what sits behind everything, is this understanding of wairua. So Mauri ohoho, nākau aroha, they are measures that we have, and the only way you can understand them is if you take a holistic view. If you take a compartmental view, which is how most of their systems and processes work, well then you can't just sit back and feel something. Does it feel, does everything look right and feel good? And then, so macro, micro, bottom up, top down. We're very much a bottom up process. But a lot of companies, mate, all the good corporates now are really on this journey. Some of them more advanced, and they have alignment to the principles and values that we've brought. And that's what we're trying to measure. And, that's what we built the tool. We built a tool on how to measure them. But as flash as the tool might be, it's still only as good as the person. There's the lens, and there's the person looking through the lens. So if you don't come in with the right nākau and the right hingingaro for that, you're going to get a different outcome. Now, we don't know how to address that. So you have to come in with a Te Ao Māori view. We've created a Te Ao Māori lens, but if someone else looked at that lens, they might get a different outlook altogether. unless they have a true empathy and understanding of, this, what we call it a collective self-intelligence. It's another Chris Winitana word.
Oh, I like that, collective self-intelligence. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
How do you sit yourself inside the collective
Yeah.
and work for the collective?
Are you busy? Are there lots of companies doing this now?
Yeah, ESG is pretty much standard,
Yep.
Irrespective of what you might hear in the news.
Yeah.
In the corporate world, ESG is, if you're not doing ESG, you're being left behind.
And there's an expectation from a lot of companies now that shareholders want this too.
Yeah.
Right? This is what they're talking about more and more at AGMs and things like that, right?
Yeah, it's ethics,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We want to feel as though if we are investing in anything, that it's doing some good. It's not just about making money. And that's the shift, that's the global shift we're trying to force, because the finance system, and you need to put it in its context, it's created by humans, only exists because of humans. But what goes on in the world now is we look to it for all our solutions.
Yeah. Yeah.
We look to money to solve the problems that we have. And so that's part of the training you've got to put in your brain. Put finance, investment, put it in context,
Yeah.
and then understand that it is receptive to your values.
We've seen recently the advent of the Māori economy has grown, but also Māori businesses in many ways are actually outperforming the traditional big companies of Aotearoa New Zealand. That's across the board, but also in this space. Are you working mainly with non-Māori companies now, or are Māori companies just as interested, perhaps even just, making sure that they're doing what they say they are doing and walking the talk when they're having the AGM with iwi and whānau and all that kind of thing?
Yes, there's a lot going on in that space, as you know. And even from many years ago, we talked about, manaakitanga, whanaungatanga, all those tangas. They were easy to write, but then we just behaved that way. For in a smaller business, you can lead through example. But as your business grows, you now need to have systems, processes, policies, and inside the organisation that embed your values and then imbue them through the whole organisation. So where we started when you were involved in that many years ago, we used to write all these strategic plans and all these plans, would have all these lovely words. Then we had to get into, well, how do you train that into people? So you write it into your code of conduct. It's how you employ people, how you screen people to employ them so they can see whether they are aligned to these values. How do you train them? How do you incentivize them? And so that's where we're at now. Bringing those values right into the organisation and then into this space, which is when you make an investment decision, what basis are you making that decision on? And demonstrate how that aligns to your values. So we're all doing it slightly different. We've gone because we can, and we had the freedom. We had a blank sheet. We're not talking iwi assets.
Yeah.
We're out here being fresh, and we can pretty much do what we wanted as long as we stayed within a Māori framework.
Yeah.
So we had the freedom to develop this tool quite a bit differently. But I apply it into the iwi organisations I'm involved with, because the principles are the same. And then it comes back to, again, the Māori value base. We follow nature's law. You put the environment, again, wairu is always in the centre, all invasive. You put the environment for people for profit. So now develop an investment and decision-making system around that. Sounds simple, but that's what we're all working on, and we're all at different levels. But now there's a lot more collaboration around what we're doing. There isn't a standard, There's an accounting standard. There's all sorts of other standards for everything else. All sorts of different. Every sector, every industry, every sector has benchmarks and comparisons and all sorts of ISOs or whatever, some compliance requirements. We don't have that within Māori. But we have to jump those bars still. If we want to sell logs, for example, our forest has to be certified to get into certain markets. And part of that certification is an indigenous component. But hey, we are the indigenous, and we get international people telling us how to be indigenous on our own indigenous land and our own business. So those are the challenges we have. But as Māori ourselves, we don't have a standard that says, this is how well you're doing with whataungatanga in your organisation. This is how well you're doing with, caring and training and developing your rangatahi. This is how well the health statistics are the health statistics. But that nuance of how well are you bringing in that cultural connection to the patient. There's all sorts of training around that.
Yeah.
But you don't come. Well, I suppose they do. In certain sectors, they do have a certificate that shows that you are competent in those things, but not really in the investment space yet.
I'm going to apologise for asking you this question, but it's just something I've thought of in my mind. In your view, how many Maori companies would pass the, for want of a better way of putting this, the Tahito test?
I'd say many of them. I couldn't give you a number. But the reason why I say that is because now we have to distinguish between an individually owned company
yes.
and our Māori entities,
Yep.
which are collective,
Yep.
right, where it's multiple ownership. Because as soon as you come in with that collective principle, then you're already over halfway, aren't you?
Yeah. That's the assumption that I would make, right?
Yeah. I mean, certainly we're still learning, and we have all the same issues that every other business has, and every other race of people have around the world. The green-eyed dragon.
Yeah.
Right? How do you manage, make sure your people aren't being fraudulent or negligent and all those sorts of things? But we're starting from a different base in that if it's collectively owned, intergenerational, then already you're sort of partway there. All you got to do is finesse and refine and develop your systems and tools within that. But then, the Department of Statistics have just sort of upped their definition of what is a Māori business. They've sort of stayed in a safe space, but for procurement, you have to be 50% owned.
Yeah.
They stopped off going and demonstrate you have Māori values. But you can see that's the journey we're on.
And that's something that you could actually play a really big role in that space, actually, is because if you're looking for something or someone or some whatever it might be that can put a bit of rigor around that values-aligned practice stuff, well, this is what we're talking about, Tim. This is what you're doing right now, right? Do you think we're going to get back to that place at some point, at some time? Because the Crown's acting the way that the Crown is at the moment. It's trying to account for every dollar, particularly in the Māori space. When it comes to that kind of thing, do you think that's where we're going to end up, is where this is the work that you're doing is so crucial, and at some point there's going to be the want for greater rigour and review and attestation, which actually you can provide because of the work you're doing now?
So if I read into your question, you're going, how Māori is Māori?
And which is why I apologise for asking the question in the first place, right?
Yeah. And, I mean,
actually, the point I'm trying to get to is how good is actually practice. So, yes, I asked about Māori, and again, I've got some natural assumptions. But as I said earlier, if Māori are outperforming a lot of other businesses, this is the model by which we should be going. An easier way of getting there is working with you and your company to be able to help those companies achieve best practice where a lot of Māori companies are sitting at the moment.
Well, let's put that in this context.
Yep.
And so you've got ESG, environmental social governance. That is all it is a risk measure.
Yeah.
It measures how well your company will deal with these risks. It's not. It doesn't say that your company is good or not. Right? You have to bring those values and determine that by the values you can bring. But the technology and the data is open to that.
Yeah.
I used to say when we used to do these business seminars many years ago with Federation of Māori Authorities, one of the things we used to say, look, business doesn't care about your race or your religion. You either make a profit or you don't. But it is receptive to good values and good behaviours.
Yeah.
So where a lot of the industry is at, you have the sustainable development goals, right? And so these, remember, it's a huge industry has come off the back of this stuff now.
Yes.
And then you got principles of responsible investing. Then I'm associated with Rehua, which is Responsible Investment Association Australasia. So it's across New Zealand and Australasia. Toitu Tahua, our Centre for Financial Sustainability, have some association with them. And then Mindful Money is another entity which looks at ethics in our investing. And so that's the sort of spaces I'm working in around, trying to bring Māori into that space. But the fundamental difference when you bring a Māori approach, or what we've done at least anyways, and I think this is how we approach it, when you set your values, you develop an ideology of where you would like to be, where if you look at impact investing and responsible investing, It's actually trying to solve a problem.
Yeah.
They look at the sustainable development goals, or how do we fix the problems?
Yeah.
And we're going, oh, we're not about fixing the problem. We're looking about measuring how well you're going against what is the ideal. So that leads on, and if you don't mind me jumping to that space, what we see that, I didn't quite touch on the values before, our behavioural values, right? Whanaungatanga, whakapapa, whakarongo, whakatau tō kaha, sensuality, hono tahi tō wairua, mahi tahi tō tapu. That's all. And what we had to do there is go from understand what that meant in Māori, translate that to the best English we could, and then translate that into something that we can find a measurement for. So that,
and to be applicable and practical.
Yeah. So those are the steps. We had to make sure that we understood its eloquence in Māori to then translate that into an applied English statement and then find a measure that best reflected that. The measures might change as they improve, but the strength of what we're trying to measure and understanding of it doesn't. Hey, that's that kauairunga.
Yes.
Make sure we've got our...
Yes.
So then coming back to where we were around what is that ideology, well, we only added this component in the last couple of years, and this was around, we've been dragged into impact, and well, how can you make your fund now become an impact fund? Now, there's global definitions, around impact. And then we had the certifications through organisations like Rehua. We thought, let's see if we can jump that bar. But we found that the gap from our Māori understanding, because we didn't have a word for impact. Right? So, well, what's our word? Well, let's go tūtupanga, which is more around reciprocity or that balance.
Yeah, balance.
If you're going to take, you're going to give back.
Yeah.
And so we went down that path. And so we come up with 6 odd measures, and the first one was te paiorangi. Well, that one is zero emissions, right? What's the ideology? Zero emissions, and not just carbon, it's all emissions. Yeah. So that's the pure goal. Well, some companies are there through offsetting, that they offset and they have a zero emission target. So that's a measure. How well do you have a target, and how well are you performing against your target? Because different industries, it's tough for them to say we're going to go zero. So that's one. Then te poho o papa tunuku, the breast of papa. So that's all, anything that goes into the ground. Yeah. Well, companies have zero waste. Yeah, zero waste to landfill targets now. Yeah. And so, we're developing this as the industry or the world is developing these measures. Yeah. And so it was easier for it to be understood and applied. Well, but that's the ideology. Right? Yeah. Yeah. So there's no company right now that meets all that. Then you get into the social stuff, the mana taurite. But if you really want to bring in equity, because again, the argument is that avarice is the word I've learnt. Personal wealth, self-gratification, and ownership of assets. And it's the insatiable desire for that. And that's what underpins, again, this individualistic type of world, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's what drives it. And it's actually ingrained in how we're educated, how we're taught, and in the systems. And it's easy for us as Māori, we can unpack it and see it, but if you're living in it, it's hard to see it. Well, one measure is that what is the disparity between the top paid person and the median for that country, and we get better points. It doesn't mean they don't get into a portfolio, but they'll get better points.
Which actually, and it comes back to another point, because I know you talked about Australia and New Zealand. That's where your focus is, Australasia. There will be some differences there, obviously, because of just size of population and everything else in Australia. But for Tahito, and you as its managing director, Tim, is that where you just want to stay? Or do you think, I think of things like the UN's got its own little approach in terms of ethical investing and all the points and factors that takes into account. And lots of companies are trying to look at the UN formula. Do you think this could be taken wider? Is that where you want to go?
So the short answer is yes. The reason why we ended up starting with Australasian equities, hence the name Te Tai o Rehua, Tasman Sea, was because the shop I partnered up with, that was their strength. Right? So we had the once you get past all our non-financial screens, kaupapa-based, values-based screens, well, then you still got to do your financial stuff. Yeah. And that was the strength of the investment services group and the companies within that I was working with. So that was a easy space to start because we had the sort of analytical strength there. The other component was, well, if you want to invest in good, wouldn't you want it to be more in your own country than in some other part of the world? So that was sort of underpinned that. But now, I mean, our aspiration is to do a global equities portfolio. It takes a lot more work. You need bigger licenses to bigger, international finance systems to access the data, which we have, but it's just more time.
And given the way the global economy is going at the moment, Trump and tariffs and all that kind of stuff, the world's in an interesting place, Tim, which actually might mean you need more of this. There might be more need for this now, given the way things are going.
Yeah, in my view, it's a pendulum swing. That it swings this way. Let's just hope it doesn't break in the swing, because you push the swing too hard, sometimes you fall off it. Right, and that's in investment and business speak. That's a soft landing versus a hard landing. Hard landing is when you go into depression and the wheels fall off finance and economy, which it's come close to. That's the GFC. But remember, we've had a number of huge events in the past. This one is a lot more of this behavioural understanding. We easy for us. We're connected to the environment, so looking after papatūānuku should come as part of our innate understanding. So and a global fund, and just saying this openly, I'm still struggling with. Maybe it's because of where we are I think we're past a renaissance, but in our just development as Māori, putting your money in other parts of the world. And so I'm still trying to reconcile that. You might be able to help me with this, Julian. How do we reconcile? Because when I break down what we're doing, right, we're still a car, right? It's still an investment fund alongside all the other investment funds. But we're in this bunch over here of that we're electric sort of hybrid cars. We're not a petrol car. And we're there for a reason. But then how do you distinguish indigenous and Māori against all electric cars that exist? And so when we're sitting there in the shop window, so to speak, hanging our banner saying, here we are, how do we distinguish indigenous from an electric car from China or America or wherever? I mean, we probably have that answer for ourselves. It's easy to understand as Māori and other indigenous people, but how do we show and demonstrate that there is a added value, or there's a betterment from that?
I remember this coming up mid-2000s. We're running out of time, but I remember this coming up in the mid-2000s when they had that toi iho mark. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And that was all about that. And I know they're looking at it. You'll know this. I know Pānera and them are looking at it, tourism in terms of authentic indigenous experiences. Canada, Australia, Aotearoa. And maybe it's time to wheel back around there, Tim. That will be the authentic, iconic identifier, That's fascinating. It's a fascinating kaupapa. And aside from saying I wish you the best with it, because I do, particularly dealing with what Māori are dealing with the Crown at the moment, it's an interesting time to be, and I think a really interesting time for you in terms of the work that you're doing. And as I say, I wish you the best with it. And then when Tina eventually comes back from Taiwan, she can help.
Yep, she can take over.
She can take over. Te me mihi ana, e te whananga, tēnei ka mihi atu. Kia koe. It was Temuera Hall. He is, of course, as I said, the co-founder and managing director of Tahito, your world first indigenous ethical investment services company. Thank you so much for listening to the show. This week, we will have more next week. Until then, e te wia ki ana te kōrero ko te toka i a ki ha he toka whitianga rā, ko te toka i Māpuna ko tāwe ki te ai, ko te ripo kau, te hewa Māori ora, kia tātou katoa.